Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. As you may or may not know, it is the Doctor Who 60th anniversary this year, and with it comes a plethora of stories from Doctor Who's expanded media in the long wait till the anniversary in November. And one of those constant contributors is that of Big Finish Audios. And today they have just released the first part of their ongoing 60th story event, Once and Future, the story being titled Past Lives. And I don't normally cover Big Finish on this channel, mainly because I honestly struggle in terms of retention of purely audio-based forms of media. I just find having a visual format easier to consume. However, with that being said, I thought since it was the 60th year and this does have some interesting parallels to the 60th anniversary specials we will be seeing on TV, which I will get into, I figured I might as well give this a go. But before we get into it, if you could do me a teeny tiny little favour and click that subscribe button, it'd be very much appreciated. We are trying to get to 20,000 subscribers as quickly as possible, and we are just about like 250 odd subscribers away from 20,000. It's my goal. I'm getting there this month, I've decided. Any support will be greatly appreciated on that front. But with that said, let's get into the video. So as I said, this is an ongoing series, and what they've released is the first story in the range, entitled Past Lives. I will warn you now, there are spoilers for this story in this video, so if you don't want to be spoiled and you want to listen to the audio, I'd suggest it. It's only $8.99 on the Big Finish website, so if you can spare it, feel free. But this will contain spoilers. So the story opens up with us during the Time War, with the Time Lords finding a wounded Doctor on the battlefield. It's implied that this Doctor is Paul McGann, however, it's never actually said out loud in the story which Doctor this is. And that's because, immediately as soon as the Time Lords try and help the Doctor out and heal his wounds, he begins to degenerate, cycling through different incarnations of the Doctor, such as Sylvester McCoy's 7th Doctor, Colin Baker's 6th, Peter Davison's 5th, and Tim Treloar as the 3rd Doctor, and Michael Troughton as the 2nd Doctor, alongside Steve Noonan as the 1st Doctor. Now, I haven't listened to much of their works in terms of the impressionists of the Doctors, but they all did a serviceable job to me. They all sounded enough like their original counterparts for you to know who they were, before eventually the body settles for a brief time on Tom Baker's Doctor. And that is the Doctor that we follow for the majority of this story, who immediately goes searching for the meddling monk for answers, and thus a wider plot ensues, in which the meddling monk is attempting to get this piece of alien technology for an alien species, who have basically blackmailed him with death if he doesn't do what they need. This leads to him heading towards the Unit Black Archive, and Kate and Osgood appear alongside the 4th Doctor, and Sarah Jane Smith is also kidnapped by the monk. This story is very fun, and Rufus Hound's meddling monk is definitely really fun. This is my first time actually listening to him perform that character. I know that he's been doing it for some years at this point, but he definitely gives a sort of slimy, trickstery performance as the meddling monk, which is what you'd expect. As the Doctor tails him for information, we see him kind of doing some dodgy dealings for the technology he needs, hearing about his various escapades, stealing money and putting it in Swiss banks so that he can buy diamonds. And it's very fun, and I really enjoy Rufus Hound's performance. However, with that being said, the highlight of the performances for me is undoubtedly Tom Baker's return as the 4th Doctor. Now, apparently this was recorded back in 2021, so yeah, they really planned these things ahead, but Tom Baker slips right back into the role. I've listened to a couple of his Big Finish, particularly the old Doctor's New Monsters range, and he was really good there, and I have no complaints. He was still full of life and energy, and exactly as you basically remember him, despite him being several, decades older at this point. The dry wit and humour of the 4th Doctor is on full display in this story. You get some really nice interactions. There's one in particular that I really liked, where he was explaining to Kate and Osgood, who also appear in this story, how he hasn't looked this good in decades. And I couldn't help but smile at that. It felt very Tom for him to be kind of exuberant at the idea of having this body again. We don't get many details as to why this degeneration is happening the way it is. The meddling monk doesn't really have the answers. All we know is that essentially he's been hit with some sort of degeneration weapon, and for the time being he will continue to cycle through incarnations. And the story actually ends with the 4th Doctor beginning to change again before the credits roll. So we'll assumedly see another story in the future with a different incarnation. I'm particularly excited because we know that Christopher Eccleston is going to be part of this range, so that's going to be very interesting. To hear him play a Doctor from a different part of the timeline, that's going to be really fun, even if it is, the same voice and personality, I suppose. The villains of this story and the ones that the Meddling Monk are working for are called the Hyrith. They're basically, from what I understand, like lizard-like crocodile warrior creatures who, incidentally, the Fourth Doctor and Sarah Jane had run-ins with before, and they basically want the Meddling Monk to steal a device from UNIT for their own purposes, and in return, the Meddling Monk will be cured of his, bombs that are on his body. However, they betray him, and the Doctor eventually manages to clear him of the bombs himself. It's a very light story, and I think I enjoyed it because of that. It wasn't overly long or complicated. It was rather simplistic. A good starting point for the ongoing story. I am interested to see how the degeneration actually works, because it seems as though it also degenerates the clothes, because we hear from Sarah Jane, as Sarah Jane, within the context of this story, played by Sadie Miller, who is, I believe, Elizabeth Sladen's daughter. We hear her say that for her, this takes place just after she was dropped off in, I believe it was Aberdeen, at the end of Hand of Fear. And she says he doesn't look any different from when he last saw her, implying that yes, the costume does change alongside the body, as is the case in the 60th anniversary. And of course, technically did happen in Power of the Daleks as well. I think overall they did a really good job of balancing having nostalgic characters whilst also having a logical explanation as to why those characters are there, as the reason the Meddling Monk kidnaps Sarah Jane is because she dealt with the Hyrith before, and the device that he needs is something that Sarah Jane saw on that previous adventure. So they do a good job justifying all the characters being in the story. It doesn't feel out of place at all. The Doctor landing in the 2010s and the Black Archive is part of the Meddling Monk's whole scheme. So that makes sense as well. And I think it just felt really natural. It felt like the Doctor Who universe, these different disparate elements from different parts of the show organically coming together, which I really appreciated. If there's one thing I could have asked for out of this audio, I would have liked a couple more scenes between Sarah Jane and the Fourth Doctor, or, well, the Doctor who is at least appearing as the Fourth Doctor in this story, because there's a really nice interaction between them where the Meddling Monk, towards the end of the story, again, massive spoilers, mentions the Doctor's daughter, and maybe she will have some answers. And then Sarah Jane Smith says, I didn't know you had a family, and there's this really interesting kind of dynamic there. And at the end of the story, the Meddling Monk drops Sarah Jane off, because obviously he has a TARDIS as well, and the Doctor needs to figure out what's going on with his face. Perhaps that would have been seen as too, derivative of School Reunion. However, I think it's even more interesting here, given that for Sarah, it's only just happened, whereas for the Doctor, it's been hundreds of years by this point. I assume this is around the 8th incarnation, so it would have been, hundreds of years since he'd last seen Sarah, while still having that same face, which I must admit is a really, really cool dynamic, and it kind of made me even more excited for the TV 60th anniversary, because I'm interested to see how the Doctor will react to seeing Donna again with the same face, but hundreds of years later. If it's handled anyway like this, I think that'll be really nice. I just wish there was a bit more of that in the story, if anything. I really enjoyed those brief interactions acknowledging the time that had passed, and I wouldn't mind even more of that in the story. The Hyrith themselves are fine. They're pretty, generic Doctor Who villain type characters. I didn't really feel that they were too special. I kind of just felt like, oh yeah, they're the sort of monster of the week kind of threat, and they were fine. They served their role well. To be honest, they don't do an awful lot in the story. When it comes to the initial encounter the Doctor has with UNIT, he lands, and then the Hyrith warrior that's chasing Kate and Osgood through UNIT dies of old age, and then following that, the person who Meddling Monk is dealing with turns into one of the Hyrith after he insults them, and basically says, hey, you insulted us, we're not going to help you anymore, etc. They're fine, I just didn't really feel a great deal for them. However, when their ultimate plan to revive their species is foiled, which is what the device that they want is for, they do seem to be quite empathetic by the end. It kind of gave me kind of Runaway Bride, Rachnos type vibes, although the Doctor is somewhat more sympathetic to their plight than the 10th Doctor was in that story. It's a fun little story. It's nothing that's gonna like blow your minds especially if you're like a seasoned Big Finish veteran, which I'm not. But it was an extremely fun story. The dialogue was really good. I thought the performances across the board were really good. Sadie Miller as Sarah Jane Smith does a really, really good job. Obviously, it doesn't sound 100% like Sarah Jane, but you wouldn't expect it to. It sounds close enough to a young Sarah Jane to kind of fool you enough into thinking that you are listening to these two reunite on an audio. It's really fun to see. But yeah, that's about all I have to say about Doctor Who Once and Future, Past Lives, the first in the Big Finish 60th anniversary range. What did you think about it if you've listened to it? If you haven't listened to it, what did you think about what I had to say? Drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. I have no idea how well this video is going to do, so feel free to give it a like, boost the algorithm, help me out. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.